candidates. Why, you ask? I'll tell you. For one thing, that race is more wide open than it has ever been since 2008. Just ask the dozen-plus Democrats who are already running. And President Donald Trump looks vulnerable in 2020. In fact, his low approval numbers in states like Texas, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida make his path to 270 electoral college votes look fairly bleak if the election were held today, which it's not. Now, Trump has expressed in no uncertain terms that he will run for a second term. Sidebar: the president filed to run again on the day of his inauguration for a first term, before he even knew if he liked the job yet. One thing Trump does love, however, is campaigning. He has been holding re-election rallies since February 2017, 29 days into his first term. But before Donald Trump can face off with someone like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or someone else, he may need to fight off another challenge from inside his own Republican Party. So, who might run against Trump in the Republican primary? Well, former Arizona Senator Jeff Flake says he won't challenge Trump in 2020. Former Ohio Governor John Kasich hasn't ruled out a primary challenge yet, though he's been focused lately on his new terrific job as a contributor at the cable news network. Those two aren't the only Republicans looking at the race. Bill Weld, the former Massachusetts governor, launched an exploratory committee in February 2019 to at least consider the possibility of a primary bid against Trump. At a politics and eggs breakfast in Bedford, New Hampshire, Weld called Trump unstable and a schoolyard bully, and added that Republicans in D.C. are showing, quote, the symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome. But Weld wasn't done.
The truth is that we've wasted an enormous amount of time by humoring this president, indulging him in his narcissism and his compulsive, irrational behaviors.
But perhaps Trump's most serious primary challenge in a sea of former elected officials is actually a current elected official, Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. He is currently the governor of the Old Line State, and he's been that since 2015. He was easily reelected in November with 55% of the vote. Now, the only thing more blue than a Maryland blue crab is the state's voting history. Blue. Hogan was also invited to speak at the Politics and Eggs gathering, which in and of itself is a big deal. Politics and Eggs is a delicious place where presidential candidates pass go and collect $200 on their way to early primaries. A spokeswoman for Hogan told the Baltimore Sun that Hogan is interested in attending, but no date has yet been set. Hogan recently criticized the Republican National Committee for its move to curtail the chances of a serious primary challenge to Trump. The RNC and the Trump campaign are getting super cozy in an effort to get Trump reelected in 2020, and Hogan thought that wasn't fair to totally hypothetical primary challengers who may or may not currently be the governor of Maryland. Quote, typically they try to be fair arbiters of a process, and I've never seen anything like it, and I've been involved in the Republican Party for most of my life. It's unprecedented, Hogan told Politico, adding, and in my opinion, it's not the way we should be going about our politics. The question is, what are they afraid of? Oh, snap! You don't just criticize the party, for funsies. You choose your battles. And Hogan quite clearly chose this one. Hogan is an establishment Republican and someone who is widely regarded as at least a potential future of the party. Just listen to what former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, aka the former future of the Republican Party, had to say about Hogan at his inauguration. Quote, Larry's at the top of a list of leaders that I admire today because what's happening here in Annapolis is the antithesis of what's happening in Washington, D.C. these days. Hogan is putting the preliminary pieces in place to run against Trump if the incumbent looks weak enough that A, he can be beaten in a primary, and or B, Hogan believes Trump can't win the general election. Now Hogan, you'll be shocked to hear, has some thoughts on that second point.
The issue I'm concerned about is he has a very low reelect number, I think in the 30s, high 30s or low 40s. So the chance of him losing a general election are pretty good. I'm not saying he couldn't win, but he's pretty weak in the general election.
Okay, time to throw some cold water on Hogan's theory. This is what I do. While Trump isn't in the strongest shape for a general election fight, he also can't be considered dead on arrival by any means. At 44%, Trump's overall job approval rating isn't great, but he's also got some time to turn things around. Barack Obama only had a 48% approval rating at this point in his own first term. Historical sidebar. These are my favorite. Trump's 44% is also similar to where President Jimmy Carter was in February 1979 at 42%. Carter ended up having a primary challenger, Senator Ted Kennedy, for the 80 nomination. Now, Carter won the primary, but lost to Ronald Reagan in the general election. And what's better than a historical sidebar? A historical sidebar! Reagan himself had proved to be a spoiler to President Gerald Ford 4 years earlier in 1976. After Reagan's primary challenge, Ford lost to Carter in the general. Whew, that's a lot of sidebar. Any Republican who wants to run against Trump will have to prove to voters that they're an actual viable option, not just some spoiler who guarantees Democrats the White House in 2020. Hogan, for his part, has said that he doesn't want to be a handicap to hamstring his party's chances in the general election. Quote, "My goal is not to just make the incumbent president lose in the general election," Hogan said to the Associated Press in February. Quote, "I'm not going to do that. If they're looking for someone just to be a spoiler or to throw myself on a grenade to help someone else, that's not me," end quote. But the biggest problem for Hogan, Weld, and honestly any other Republican who wants to take on Trump is this. Almost 9 in 10 Republicans approve of how the president is handling his job, according to Gallup polling. History shows that presidents generally only face serious primary challenges when their approval rating within their own party is at 75% or lower. Trump is currently way above that threshold. But one thing is for sure. Trump is a force to be reckoned with, especially with a re-election campaign that started his first month in office and that has raised more than $100 million a little less than 2 years out from any actual election. But despite all of that, more traditional